Welcome back. Today, we continue to present the questions of the first part, Section D, Cost Management. Follow the channel to receive all questions from multiple sources, old and new, until 2023. If you have any questions or requests, please write them in the comments and you will be answered. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel to reach the largest number of people interested in the CMA certificate. Let's get started. Question 1. Fashion Incorporated manufactures women's dresses using cotton and polyester. Since the same style dresses are made out of both fabrics, Fashion's uses operation costing. During June, 1,000 cotton dresses were completely produced. Also during June, 1,500 polyester dresses were started by adding all materials at the beginning of the process. Of these 1,500 dresses, 700 were completely finished and the remainder were 25% complete by the end of the month. There was no work-in-process inventory at the beginning of June. Costs incurred during June were as follows. Cotton $10,000. Polyester $22,500. Conversion costs $13,300. The cost per unit to manufacture one polyester dress during June was A. $20.32. B. $29.78. C. $22. D. $23.87. The answer is C. $22. The cost to manufacture one polyester dress in June is calculated as follows. Cost to manufacture one dress equals raw material cost per dress plus conversion cost per dress. Raw material cost per dress equals $22,500 divided by 1,500 dresses equals $15. Conversion cost per dress equals $13,300 divided by equivalent unit of conversion incurred in June. Equivalent units of conversion in June equals 1,700 dresses started and finished, plus 800 started multiplied by a 25% completion rate. Equivalent units of conversion in June equals 1,700 plus 200 equals 1,900 dresses. Therefore, the conversion cost per polyester dress equals $13,300 divided by 1,900 dresses equals $7 per dress. Cost to manufacture one dress equals $15 plus $7 equals $22. Question 2. A wig company using process costing has a weaving department and a cutting and styling department for the same product. When weaving is complete, all weaving department costs should A. Be transferred to finished goods inventory. B. Remain in the weaving department's WIP inventory account until all departments finish the wig and then debited to the company's transferred in costs account. C. Be transferred to the cutting and styling department's work in process, WIP, inventory account. D. Remain in the company's WIP inventory account until the good is complete and then be transferred to finished goods inventory. The answer is C. Be transferred to the cutting and styling department's work in process, WIP, inventory account. In process costing, each department must have its own WIP inventory account. All costs charged to that account are transferred to the next department's WIP inventory account by debiting a transferred in costs account on the next department's books. When the good is fully complete, all costs are transferred to finished goods inventory. Question 3. Southwood Industries uses a process costing system and inspects its goods at the end of manufacturing. The inspection as of June 30th revealed the following information for the month of June. Good units completed 16,000. Normal spoilage, units, 300. Abnormal spoilage, units, 100. Unit costs were, materials, $3.50, and conversion costs, $6. The number of units that Southwood would transfer to its finished goods inventory and the related cost of these units are A. Units transferred equals 16,300, cost equals $154,850. B. Units transferred equals 16,000, cost equals $154,850. C. Units transferred equals 16,000, cost equals $155,800. D. Units transferred equals 16,000, cost equals $152,000. The answer is B. Units transferred equals 16,000, cost equals $154,850. Using process costing, normal spoilage costs are spread over the cost of the 16,000 good units. Abnormal spoilage costs are charged to a loss account. 16,000 good units were produced and transferred. The cost of these units is calculated as per unit cost, units transferred to finished goods inventory equals materials cost per unit, plus conversion cost per unit cost, units transferred to finished goods inventory equals $3.50, plus $6 equals $9.50. Total cost of units transferred to finished goods inventory equals 16,300 units, times $9.50, equals $154,850. Question 4. A company is using process costing, with first in first out, FIFO, and all costs are added evenly throughout the manufacturing process. If there are 5,000 units in beginning work in process, WIP, inventory, 30% complete, 10,000 units in ending WIP inventory, 60% complete, and 25,000 units started in process this period, how many equivalent units are there for this period? A. 30,000 units. B. 26,000 units. C. 24,500 units. The answer is C. 24,500 units. Using FIFO, we need to consider the number of units started and completed, 25,000 minus 10,000, and adjust for equivalent units in both beginning and ending WIP inventory. 70% of beginning WIP inventory are completed in the period, 5,000 times 0.7 is equal to 3,500, and 60% of ending WIP inventory are completed in the period. 10,000 times 0.6 is equal to 6,000. The sum of 24,500, 15,000 plus 3,500 plus 6,000, represents the equivalent units for the period. Question 5. On July 1, Premier Paint's mixing department had 80,000 units in beginning work in process that were 65% complete. Between July 1 and July 31, the mixing department transferred 150,000 units to the packaging department. At the end of the month, on July 31, the mixing department had 40,000 units in work in process that were 80% complete. Materials are added at the beginning of the process, while conversion costs are incurred uniformly throughout the process. Premier Paints uses the FIFO method. Based on this information, which of the following statements is accurate? A. In July, the mixing department had 230,000 equivalent units of production for materials. B. In July, the mixing department had 102,000 equivalent units of production for materials. C. In July, the mixing department had 190,000 equivalent units of production for materials. D. In July, the mixing department had 110,000 equivalent units of production for materials. The answer is D. In July, the mixing department had 110,000 equivalent units of production for materials. Correct. Units transferred to the packaging department include the 80,000 units in beginning work in process. Because materials are added at the beginning of the process, the 80,000 units in beginning work in process should not be included in the calculation of equivalent units of production for materials. However, for the same reason, the units in ending work in process should be considered. See the following calculation: 150,000, transferred out, minus 80,000, units in beginning inventory, plus 40,000, units in ending inventory. Question 6. Wilson Tech's production cost data for the current period is: beginning work in process 0 units. Units started 16,000 units. Units transferred out 9,800 units. Ending work in process 6,200 units. Materials are entered at the beginning of the process. The ending work in process units are 40% complete as to conversion costs. Using the FIFO method, what are the equivalent units of production for materials? A. 12,280 units. B. 16,000 units. C. 9,800 units. D. 6,200 units. The answer is B. 16,000 units. Correct. If materials are entered at the beginning of the process, ending work in process is 100% complete with respect to materials, therefore, the equivalent units of production equals 16,000 units, 9,800 plus 6,200 by 100%. Question 7. The cutting department at the Blanc company had 4,000 units in beginning work in process, 9,000 units transferred out, and 2,000 units in ending work in process. How many units were started by Blanc during the month? A. 11,000 units. B. 6,000 units. C. 7,000 units. D. 9,000 units. The answer is C. 7,000 units. Correct. In process costing, units to account for, beginning work in process plus units started, equals units accounted for, units transferred out plus ending work in process. Units accounted for equals 11,000, 9,000 plus 2,000, therefore, units started is calculated as follows. Units started plus 4,000 is equal to 11,000. Units started equals 11,000 minus 4,000 is equal to 7,000. Question 8. A company that uses a process costing system inspects its goods at the 60% stage of completion. If the firm's ending work in process inventory is 80% complete, how would the firm account for its normal and abnormal spoilage? Asterisk source, retired ICMA CMA exam questions. A. Both normal and abnormal spoilage costs would be added to the cost of the good units completed during the period. B. Normal spoilage costs would be allocated between the cost of good units completed during the period and the ending work in process inventory. In contrast, abnormal spoilage costs would be written off as a loss. C. Normal spoilage costs would be added to the cost of the good units completed during the period. In contrast, abnormal spoilage costs would be written off as a loss. D. Both normal and abnormal spoilage costs would be written off as an expense of the period. The answer is B. Normal spoilage costs would be allocated between the cost of good units completed during the period and the ending work in process inventory. In contrast, abnormal spoilage costs would be written off as a loss. If a firm has normal and abnormal spoilage, the normal spoilage costs would be allocated between the cost of good units completed during the period and the ending work in process inventory. In contrast, abnormal spoilage costs would be written off as a loss. Question 9. Waller Company uses a weighted average process costing system. Material B is added at two different points in the production of shirts. 40% is added when the units are 20% completed, and the remaining 60% of material B is added when the units are 80% completed. At the end of the quarter, there are 22,000 shirts in process, all of which are 50% completed. With respect to material B, the ending shirts in process represent how many equivalent units? A. 8,800 units. B. 4,400 units. C. 11,000 units. D. 22,000 units. The answer is A. 8,800 units. The ending inventory of 22,000 shirts is only 50% complete. Therefore, the inventory units have only 40% of the material B. This equates to 8,800 equivalent units, which is calculated by multiplying the number of units in ending inventory, 22,000, by the percent of material B, 40%. Equivalent units, shirts equals 22,000 units, times 0.4, equals 8,800 units. Question 10. A sporting goods manufacturer buys wood as a direct material for baseball bats. The forming department processes the baseball bats, and the bats are then transferred to the finishing department where a sealant is applied. The forming department began manufacturing 10,000 KC sluggers during the month of May. There was no beginning inventory. Costs for the forming department for the month of May were: direct materials $33,000. Conversion costs $17,000. Total $50,000. A total of 8,000 bats were completed and transferred to the finishing department. The remaining 2,000 bats were still in the forming process at the end of the month. All of the forming department's direct materials were placed in process, but, on average, only 25% of the conversion cost was applied to the ending work in process inventory. The cost of the work in process inventory in the forming department at the end of May is A. $0. B. $1,000. C. $10,000. D. $7,600. The answer is D. $7,600. In a process costing system, costs may be added to a product at different points in the manufacturing process. As far as the units in work in process inventory at the end of the month are concerned, all of the direct materials costs have been applied to them. But only 25% of the conversion costs have been applied. Manufacturing cost per unit equals direct material cost applied per unit plus conversion cost applied per unit. Direct material costs applied per unit equals $33,000 divided by 10,000 units equals $3.30 per unit. Note that direct material costs are related to all 10,000 units, so that number must be used as the denominator. Conversion costs applied during the period totaled $17,000 and they were applied in full to the 8,000 units that were transferred out, as well as 25% applied to the units remaining in process. There are 2,000 units remaining in process, which are 25% complete. 2,000 units times 0.25 is equal to 500 equivalent units for conversion costs. Conversion costs per unit equals $17,000 divided by 8,000 units plus 500 units equals $17,000 divided by 8,500 units equals $2 per unit. Cost of units in ending inventory equals unit direct material cost times equivalent units for direct materials plus unit conversion cost times equivalent units for conversion costs. Cost of units in ending inventory equals $3.30 times 2,000 units plus $2 times 500 equivalent units equals $6,600 plus $1,000 equals $7,600. Question 11. Sweetums syrup adds raw materials costs at the beginning of its manufacturing process and incurs conversion costs uniformly throughout the process. At the beginning of last month, Sweetums had 20,000 units that were 40% complete in its beginning work-in-process inventory. Over the course of the month, the company began production of 150,000 units. At month's end, 90,000 of those units were finished and transferred out, while the remaining units were 90% complete. Using the weighted average method, what was Sweetums' equivalent units of production for materials for the month? A. 170,000 equivalent units. B. 98,000 equivalent units. C. 162,000 equivalent units. D. 240,000 equivalent units. The answer is A. 170,000 equivalent units. Correct. The first step is to calculate the number of units in ending work-in-process inventory. Since units to account for must equal units accounted for, ending work-in-process inventory can be solved for as follows. Units to account for are beginning work-in-process plus units started, 20,000 plus 150,000 is equal to 170,000. Units accounted for are units transferred out plus ending work-in-process, 90,000 plus ending work-in-process inventory. 20,000 plus 150,000 is equal to 90,000 plus ending work-in-process inventory. Ending work-in-process inventory equals 170,000 minus 90,000. Ending work-in-process inventory equals 80,000 units. Because ending work-in-process is 100% complete with respect to materials, they are added at the beginning of the process. Equivalent units of production under the weighted average method equals 170,000 units, 90,000 plus 80,000 times 100%. Question 12. Wilson Tech's production cost data for the current period is: beginning work-in-process 0 units. Units started 16,000 units. Units transferred out 9,800 units. Ending work-in-process 6,200 units. Materials are entered at the beginning of the process. The ending work-in-process units are 40% complete as to conversion costs. Using the FIFO method, what are the equivalent units of production for conversion costs? A. 16,000 units. B. 9,800 units. C. 6,200 units. D. 12,280 units. The answer is D. 12,280 units. Correct. Equivalent units of production equals number of units transferred out plus number of units in ending work-in-process times percent completed. Therefore, the equivalent units of production equal 12,280, 9,800 plus 6,200 by 40%. Question 13. This month, the roasting department of Java Coffee Company completed and transferred out 75,000 one-pound bags of coffee. The department also had 25,000 units that were 80% complete with respect to conversion costs and no beginning work in process. Using the FIFO method, how many equivalent units of production for conversion costs does the department have for the month? A. 70,000. B. 95,000. C. 100,000. D. 80,000. The answer is B. 95,000. Correct. Since there is no beginning work-in-process inventory, the equivalent units of output equal units transferred out plus the equivalent units in ending work-in-process. Therefore, the equivalent units of production equals 95,000, 75,000 plus 25,000 times 80%. Question 14. Pinnacle Industries Fabrication Department had the following data for September. Work in process, September 1st 110,000 units. Completed and transferred out 250,000 units. Work in process, September 30th 100,000 units. Pinnacle adds materials at the beginning of the fabrication process, and, with respect to conversion costs, the beginning work in process is 40%, while the ending work in process is 75% complete. Using the FIFO method, what is the department's total number of equivalent units for materials in September? A. 360,000 equivalent units. B. 250,000 equivalent units. C. 240,000 equivalent units. D. 281,000 equivalent units. The answer is C. 240,000 equivalent units. Correct. Because materials are added at the beginning of the production process, units in beginning work in process are already 100% complete for materials. Also, for the same reason, ending work in process is 100% complete for materials. Therefore, equivalent number of units for materials can be calculated as follows. Equivalent number of units for materials equals 250,000, completed and transferred, minus 110,000 units in beginning work in process, plus 100,000 units in ending work in process, equals 240,000. Question 15. In the month of June, a department had 20,000 units in beginning work in process that were 70% complete. During June, 90,000 units were transferred into production from another department. At the end of June there were 10,000 units in ending work in process that were 40% complete. Materials are added at the beginning of the process, while conversion costs are incurred uniformly throughout the process. Using the weighted average method, the equivalent units of production for materials in June were A. 114,000 equivalent units. B. 104,000 equivalent units. C. 110,000 equivalent units. D. 100,000 equivalent units. The answer is C. 110,000 equivalent units. Correct. The number of units transferred out must first be calculated. Units to account for, beginning work in process plus units transferred in, must equal units accounted for, units transferred out plus ending work in process, so the units transferred out can be calculated as follows. 20,000 plus 90,000 equals units transferred out plus 10,000. Units transferred out equals 110,000 minus 10,000 is equal to 100,000 units. Under the weighted average method, the formula to calculate the equivalent units of production for materials equals the number of units transferred out plus the ending work in process multiplied by the percent complete. Since materials are added at the beginning of the process, the ending work in process is 100% complete in regard to materials, therefore, the equivalent units of production equals 110,000, 100,000 plus 10,000 by 100%. Question 16. Kepler Optics makes lenses for telescopes. Because Kepler will only sell lenses of the highest quality, the normal spoilage during a reporting period is 1,000 units. At the beginning of the current reporting period, Kepler had 2,200 units in inventory, and during the period, production was started and completed on 4,000 units. Units in inventory at the end of the current reporting period were 1,500, and the units transferred out were 3,000. During this period, the abnormal spoilage for Kepler's lens production was A. 1,000 units. B. 700 units. C. 1,700 units. D. 3,200 units. The answer is B. 700 units. Total spoilage equals beginning units plus units started minus units completed and transferred out minus ending units equals 2,200 plus 4,000 minus 3,000 minus 1,500 is equal to 1,700. Abnormal spoilage equals total spoilage minus normal spoilage equals 1,700 minus 1,000 is equal to 700.